You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
We are standing on the site of the old Dominican friary known as the Blackfriars. In the early 16th century, it was much more than just a religious house. It was a cultural, political, and intellectual hub. Councils and parliamentary meetings were held on its vast site, which once stretched from Carter Lane in the north to Queen Victoria Street in the south. But we aren't here today to meet the friars, who were kicked out in 1538 during the dissolution of the monasteries. Instead, we are in search of a brilliant rogue, Thomas Gemini, printer, instrument maker and surgeon, whose shop occupied a place on this site between 1555 and 1562. Gemini, real name Lambert or Lambrechts, was born in Flanders between about 1500 and 1520. He moved to Louvain to study copper engraving, where for a time he may have lived with the brilliant Flemish anatomist Andreas Vesalius. He seems to have been a Protestant at a time when religious upheavals were shaking the Low Countries. It may have been for this reason that he came to England, in search of a religious safe haven and a patron who would support him and his work. Here, in 1545, Gemini published his first book, the Compendio Certotius Anatomi Delineatio, or in English, a complete delineation of the entire anatomy. This consisted of a pirated version of the anatomy books written by Gemini's old housemate Vesalius, the original woodcut illustrations copied into copperplate engravings by Gemini's hand. Somehow Vesalius got hold of Gemini's edition and wrote a bitter letter complaining about the grossly incompetent imitators who had reproduced his work so obscurely and without skill in the engraving in such a way that it would embarrass someone to believe it had been published that way by me. He took issue particularly with the course of vessels, so distorted that I can see scarcely any evidence of my diligence. And he complained about the reduced size. Everything in England is hideously reduced out of proportion, he wrote. He seems to have been particularly annoyed by the alteration of tiny details in the illustrations, arguing that they made a nonsense of the whole work, or in his words, hideously marred it. The English edition may not have met Vesalius's high standards, but it met with approval from Henry VIII, to whom Gemini had dedicated the work. The following year, Gemini was receiving an annuity of £10 from the king, roughly the annual wage of a skilled tradesman. In Edward VI's reign, he continued to attract royal patronage, serving as a surgeon to the young king. In 1555, he moved his printer's shop here, to the Blackfriars. But in the same year, he was examined and penalised by the College of Physicians for practising medicine without a licence. In lieu of a fine, the college had Gemini print 200 copies of a letter which could be carried by their investigators, detailing their powers. This was not to be Gemini's only appearance in institutional records. On the 21st of July 1555, the Stationers' Company fined him for calling another member a false knave. And yet, despite these controversies, his business was flourishing. In 1556, when a levy was raised on members of the Stationers' Company, he fell into the highest earning bracket. Part of Gemini's success may have been down to his innovation. As the first significant copperplate engraver in England, he was the first person to introduce a new and more exacting method of illustration into the English book trade. His works include single-sheet prints for barber surgeons, indicating the location of veins for the purposes of bloodletting, and an innovative lift-the-flap anatomy sheet, a forerunner of today's pop-up body books, in which viewers are invited to look beneath their skin and see their insides for themselves. But Gemini wasn't simply an engraver. Alongside his surgical practice, he also made astronomical and navigational instruments, several of which survive in collections today. He made 2 astrolabes and a quadrant for Edward VI, and another astrolabe for Elizabeth I in 1559, now in the Museum of the History of Science in Oxford. In 1562, he printed a mathematical textbook and included an advertisement for his own work in the back. Imprinted at London by Thomas Gemini, dwelling within the Blackfriars, who is there ready exactly to make all the instruments appertaining to this book. He didn't live long enough to fulfil the promise. In late May 1562, broke of body but of good and perfect mind and memory, his will was made and proved. His brother, Jasper Lambert, was his executor, perhaps a twin, who inspired Gemini's adopted name. During his life, Gemini had introduced new techniques into a backward English market, collaborating with his fellow immigrants here in Blackfriars to produce extraordinary and unusual prints that were at once practical textbooks and works of art.